Hello, welcome to this 10-minute presentation, Reducing the Risk of Bullying. This is one of two presentations, but it doesn't matter which you see first. Also, for further reading, including the published article, Help and Hindrance, Clergy Talking About Bullying, do check out my website, which you can see at the bottom of the slide. To sum up the previous video, firstly, as far as I have seen, bullying in the church context is no more or less prevalent than the wider experience of people in UK workplaces. But if we're taking the well-being of clergy seriously, then we do need to do something about bullying. For the diocese I studied, around 10% of the clergy had experiences which met an objective measure of severe bullying. I doubt that diocese was exceptional. Secondly, when there is a hope that people will continue to work together, a focus on changing behaviours rather than defining bullying and labelling the bully has its merits. In this 10 minutes, I'd like to share some of the theological aspects of my work. These can be brought together in two words: oikodomeo, building or edification, and scandalon, offence or stumbling block or a trap perhaps. These are the words that we see in the epistles and gospel. My work is grounded in the necessity of Christians aiming to build up one another, and the sad truth that in doing this we sometimes create stumbling blocks. I see this work as relating to mission, in that it is a huge own goal when people walk away from the church because they don't like the way Christians treat each other. So, starting with the positive, some verses to encourage us towards building each other up. I'll give you a moment to read those verses. For me, this emphasis on building up, of which this is just a few examples, also relates to a lovely resource that comes with PCC Tonight. It includes what it calls one another verses, describing positive ways for Christians to relate to one another. And now the other side of the coin, some scandalon verses. The stumbling block. You might be seeing that scandalon is quite mixed in the way it's used. It is good to place a stumbling block before evil, but not something for one Christian to be doing for another. In connecting bullying with stumbling blocks, I'm very much influenced by the work of René Girard. It is also picked up on by Joanna Collicutt. The Bait of Satan is not a book I worked with at the time, but it's just had its 20-year anniversary, and I am interested in it now, as I do see a connection between the habit of taking offence and bullying. I have included Stephen Pattison on shame as well, as that is also a significant dynamic. For Girard, the individual stumbling block is the start of a process which ends up with a symbolic murder, as an individual is effectively sacrificed to attempt to resolve the tensions in a group of people. My suggestion is that scapegoating is a useful way to understand bullying in the church context. It begins with one person seeking to learn from another by imitating what they do, and in this they risk becoming too similar. This imitation is something the church is very open to. In the epistles there is great encouragement to being Christ-like, but then it is often taken a step further to imitating role models such as Paul as they imitate Christ. Perhaps there isn't sufficient appreciation that imitation brings risks as well as benefits. Imitation in a church community can lead to competition, rivalry and tension because similar people need similar limited resources. In an organisation under pressure, there can be many of these small scandals that float around until the blame for all the tension is attached to one person, who is then forced out or sacrificed for the benefit of the group as a whole. I wonder if you have ever come across a situation where you hear that someone was very difficult, possibly a bully, and they have left, and everyone has breathed a sigh of relief and things will be okay now. And as Christians, they are thinking of this as a process of death and resurrection and looking forward to their new start. I see those sort of conversations as hints that scapegoating has been occurring. Perhaps the bigger the problems a community are trying to ignore, then the more significant the sacrifice needs to be. The trouble is that it is not quite the linear process on this slide, but a cycle, as the underlying tensions that cause the problems in the first place don't get addressed by following the scapegoating route. A community in which there has been one scapegoat is very open to repeating the same patterns of behaviour and arriving at another scapegoat, continuing on and on. So what does this mean for bullying in a church context? What are the implications here? Firstly, I'd like to suggest bullying is a human process that we can all get mixed up in, and more likely a group process than simply a particular bad person who is a bully. So don't leave it until you think there is bullying to decide you need to know something about bullying. You may well find that you have already been a witness and already been part of that cycle without knowing it. Be aware that sometimes the person who looks like a bully is the victim of the scapegoating process themselves. Perhaps there has been so much pressure on them that their own behaviour has finally broken down. Secondly, let's be aware of the risks of imitation and expect problems. Let's not be surprised by a relationship in difficulty, but instead look out for the early signs that it might be happening, because those things do happen. Invite people to talk about experiences early on. Be prepared to not be surprised. As Christian people, where the sacrifice of the Eucharist, of praise and thanksgiving is so important, let's be alert to the potential that sacrifice can be distorted. Perhaps be a little more suspicious when you hear that language around death and resurrection, especially if it's being applied to someone leaving the community. Look for the underlying problems that need resolving in order to stop a cycle. Don't just expect them to go away on their own. Lastly, I think this perspective offers us a chance to realise that when a relationship is in trouble, perhaps people need more space rather than getting close together. The problem is very often that they are too similar rather than they are too different. So to finish, I don't think I've offered any easy answers to something so vital to well-being, but I hope there are some thoughts here to guide the journey. Thank you.